To invade Greenland and attack its sovereignty, a fellow NATO country, would be weapons grade stupid. President Trump is not weapons grade stupid, nor is Marco Rubio. That's all I'm going to say on Greenland, but there will be more to happen with respect to Greenland.
All right, 3 times in 1 week. Listeners, how did you become so lucky, and how are we living? Like, it's been a really long year so far already, right, cousin? My God.
Yes. It's been it's January 9th.
It's crazy. We wanted to tee up this episode to talk about Greenland. But before we get there, I'm going to keep us to, let's say I'll keep us to 12 minutes. I think that's more realistic. I think we need to talk about Iran for 12 minutes, cousin. And you were on this at first. I wanted to talk about Cuba and everything else after Maduro got extracted. And you were saying, I think we need to talk about Iran. Maybe Iran is next. I'm not convinced that Iran is next for the Trump administration. But Iran does seem to be next in terms of what is happening, what isn't happening there. I'll set this up for listeners a little bit. This goes back to the end of December. The Iranian rial plummeted in value. The central bank governor had to resign. If you also, by the way, if you look at a chart of the Iranian currency over the past 30 years, if you're looking for, to be depressed, wow, what a fall from grace. And so you had some protests pop off in Iran, and that's not so interesting. That happens all the time. They started in the western provinces, so actually the Iranian security establishment was initially treating them as a foreign threat or as the usual, but now they've spread into the cities. It's sort of undeniable that they are all over the place. It's harder to understand what's going on because there's a very active Iranian diaspora that wants this regime down. The Israelis want this regime down. There's a media establishment that is willing to give voice to those people. So, for days we've been reading about, there's an exit plan for Ali Khamenei to go to Moscow. Like, sure, I have an exit plan to go to the Virgin Islands for vacation. Like, this is not news. But you start putting it all together. You start understanding that the off-ramps for Khamenei are gone. You put the military embarrassment from 12 months ago on the table. You start to be able to convince yourself that maybe something different might happen here. And also, there is the Maduro precedent. Like, what if the regime turns on the 87-year-old supreme leader who hasn't been so healthy lately? What if the IRGC makes a deal that says, okay, like, you can have Ali Khamenei, you just leave us in charge, you can have your supreme leader come and spend this money on Iranian oil infrastructure. We'll do whatever you want from that point of view. It's fine. So that's the setup. What are you thinking right now, cousin?
I liked your take that you made on X, where you basically said that this is a classic analytical trap. And the way you put it, I mean, it's funny. You asked me for my take, and I'm just regurgitating your take. This is love. This is analytical love. This is what it looks like. But yeah, you basically said, look, this has been going on since 2009. And every time it happens, everybody rushes for the exits and says this is over, and it never happens. And so the analytical trap is to dismiss it. I think you're right. I think that it does smell a little bit different, and it's not about really anything on the ground. They've shut off the internet in Iran, I believe, in previous situation. I forgot which year, but it's happened before. So what I think is different this time around is that, when you've got 80 F-35s behind you, you're going to be emboldened. And that's what the people of Iran finally feel. To give President Trump the credit, the situation in Venezuela has definitely now emboldened people to be like, hey, Trump just said he will support protests with strikes. So I'm going to go in the streets. I know that a lot of people don't want to give credit to the White House for that, but I think it's just human nature that the protesters are going to feel emboldened, especially because of what happened also last year. That is also different. What is different is the cracks that the regime has shown, something that our good friend and cousin Matt Gherkin has been saying as well. I've just talked to him about the situation a couple of days ago, and his point was like, look, the big difference is 2025 happened, and 2025 wasn't regime change, as you and I correctly forecast at the time. But it showed the vulnerability of the regime to external pressure. So if you are, if you're sitting at home, if you're sitting at home in Iran, you feel emboldened and you feel that you have wind in your sales for serious protests. So I do worry about it. Now, I still think you're right that Cuba is more likely to see exerted American pressure over the next 12 months. Like, I don't think your forecast is wrong. The reason I obsess about Iran, I think, is because I'm just so tuned to the market. I just can't get myself to care about Cuba. Like that's my failing. All you listeners out there, my failing is that I will dismiss things that cannot be monetized. That is just what I do for a living. I apologize. I'm like Malik Monk. I have never seen a shot that I'm not going to take. That's a deep reference here, but yeah, I think that's just why I'm obsessed about this, because I think even a modicum of probability that President Trump intervenes on behalf of the protesters, whatever that means, I think is going to set, energy markets alight.
Yeah, I don't think the White House is going to intervene on behalf of the protesters. You might have seen that the son of the Shah wrote a column in the Washington Post a couple of days ago. President Trump came out and said, I'm not going to meet with this guy. Like, we're just going to see how it goes in Iran in general. I think the thing that is truly different, and this you do have to give some credit to Trump for, there's no off-ramp from the current economic situation in Iran. There's no, hey, we're going to make a deal with the West and there's going to be sanctions relief. There's no, hey, we're going to be back in the JCPOA in just a little bit. You just got to hold on a little bit longer. There's no, hey, they hate ISIS, we hate ISIS. Let's work together to destroy ISIS. Maybe we can build some credibility there. What there is actually they bombed us with Israel last year. And oil is sub 50 a barrel, and we're already not getting return on our oil because it's sanctioned and everything else. The IRGC is already clandestinely moving their assets out of the country, whether it's crypto or shell organizations or the game of whack-a-mole that the Treasury Department is playing to sanction all the different ways that they're getting money out of it. So you've got Iranians who are not only maybe emboldened by the U.S., but who are also saying, I have nothing left to lose here. Like, there is no prospect that things are going to get better. And this guy's 87 years old. Like, is he even calling the shots anymore? I mean, I'm reading reports and it looks like he's not even, like, sure, he's going out there and giving speeches, but it sounds like there's a group of people behind him, including the president, including some senior officers in the IRGC, who are the ones who are actually making decisions. And that's where you get to let's make a really painful basketball metaphor. You talked about Malik Monk. Maybe this is the Trae Young trade.
Oh, God.
Shout out to Trae Young. You are gone from Atlanta. You are packing your bags to Washington. Apparently, you picked Washington, just like Ali Khamenei is picking Moscow. Nobody ever picked Moscow.
Bradley
You go to
Beal,
Moscow.
Bradley Beal, Trae Young and Khamenei.
Exactly. So, the Hawks just traded Trae for Cody Kispert and CJ McCollum.
Yep.
Not a great return for him, but maybe these guys who are behind the Supreme Leader are saying, maybe we'll trade the Supreme Leader, the Trae Young in this thing, for Cody Kispert,
I've always said that the world would be safer if we created a place where vile dictators could go and live in peace and maybe even some pleasure. If we can just squirrel them, just create like a Dubai somewhere just for dictators. And that's exactly what the Washington Wizards are for terrible NBA talent. But let's leave that aside because we don't want to lose our listeners who are not interested in NBA. I think that you're right. There's just so many things that are different now, that are all lining up. And so I think that this is I mean, look, if the transition towards a different Iran happens because of the clean and cheap Venezuela mission, you know what I mean? I mean, I'm not sure that qualifies Donald Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize, but it qualifies him for something, right? Obviously, early innings, we don't know what's going on. Iran could descend into some sort of civil war. So let's pump the brakes on patting the White House on the back. But it does seem like pressure is real. Now, before they invaded Venezuela, before they extracted Maduro from Venezuela, the White House did say that they would intervene on behalf of the protesters. And that was really, I thought that was different, and it was not on mode. What I mean is that this is a Trump administration that for the past, 6 years that he's been in power over the course of his 2 terms, effectively has told the world over, look, I don't care what you do domestically, just make sure that it doesn't hurt American interests. That's clear. And I think this was one of the first times that President Trump actually said something like, effectively like, I care about the humans in this country. And that set my antenna up. I didn't write anything about it. But then after exfilling Maduro, you start putting two and two together and saying, like, I do think Trump is building a case for renewed strikes in Iran. And I think that we need to start pricing that in. I think that, to your point, Jacob, like, I know you're hesitant to say, like, you maybe agree, but, like, it can be for show. Like, just to be clear, those strikes can be for show. It doesn't have to be an operation like the one we saw with Maduro. Mm-hmm. But it costs Trump nothing to just bomb something in Iran and to create a show of force and to create more volatility and chaos in that country, which is, as you have pointed out, as Matt Gerken has pointed out, as I agree, is kind of on thin ice. It's almost just a little shove. Like, oh, and by the way, I've also destroyed Karg Island energy infrastructure to hurt you further.
Yeah, I think all possibilities are there. I think for me, the most likely one, though, is I don't think this happens. I don't think you get regime change in Iran because of the protests, and I don't think you get regime change in Iran because the U.S. bombs them. I think the only way you get a meaningful change in Iran is if they sell out the supreme leader.
Yeah,
and what
agreed.
the Maduro operation did do is it showed that Trump he's in the business of accepting the sellout of supreme leaders. And I mean, the supreme leader is not going to dance in a palace or anything like that. He did his version today. He gave a very fiery speech in which he basically, put everybody on notice. But you can kind of imagine that is the trade. And that trade, again, you don't really have to fire a shot there. You just helicopter him out, or like the supreme leader accepts his exile. And maybe this is a nice segue. I mean, this doesn't have to be a Dubai. We're about to talk about Greenland. I'm sure we can reserve a little portion of Greenland for Dictator Island, where the dictators go to be put out to pasture and mine the ice and uranium in Greenland. That sounds like a really good use of their time.
Yeah. One historical analogy I would put here, and no surprise, my motherland is Serbia, but 1999 NATO bombing of Serbia was pretty jarring for the country and destroyed a lot of infrastructure. Slobodan Milosevic survived that. And, he withdrew from Kosovo and he got a deal from NATO he wanted. It wasn't regime change. And the Clinton administration was very clear about it wasn't seeking regime change. In October of 2020, so some, I think 18 months later, maybe a little bit shorter, there was a revolution.
2000?
Sorry.
2000, you mean?
Yeah, my bad. 2000. Yeah. October 2000, there was a revolution domestically. And it was popular unrest. And it seemed like it was popular unrest. But what actually happened was that the security forces, many of which were alleged to have committed all the humanitarian violations in Kosovo, by the way, to begin with, they turned on Slobodan Milosevic. He actually instructed them, this is the rumors of the time, to fire on protesters. And they were like, your time's out, buddy. And so they made a deal with the pro-West politicians. Eventually, they killed him. Prime Minister Đinđić was assassinated on the steps of the government building, like by one of these highly trained security forces that during the uprising turned on Milosevic. But that's a scenario where you have the West militarily intervene in a country, profoundly embarrass the leadership, show its vulnerability and its impotence. And then some 12, 18 months later, there's protests in the country, and the security forces use that protest as a way to get rid of the quote-unquote old man. So that's what you're describing, and there is a historical precedent from, 26 years ago.
Well, and there are some breadcrumbs for that. I mean, Hassan Rouhani, the former pragmatist president, who really hasn't said much in Iran for years, has been out there giving interviews again. You've had the current Iranian president, whose name I can't pronounce, I'm sorry, because the Raisi was killed in that suspicious helicopter crash. But he's out there saying we're not going to crack down on the protesters, even as the supreme leader is giving incendiary speeches about how this is going to be crushed. So you start picking up on the differences there. You also see that Iran is complicated because you've got the IRGC, they're supposed to safeguard the revolution. You've got the regular military forces, you've got paramilitary groups, but the regular military forces seem to be largely neutral. So you can imagine that if they stay out of the fray, they can be some of the muscle maybe that is accepted by the population going. And then, of course, you have the Shah's son who's out there with delusions of grandeur, thinking that they're going to welcome him back and fly the flag with the lion. So, but anyway, just to say, there are breadcrumbs for what you're talking about.
You're 100% right. Yeah. So the president, I had to look it up too because Raisi was killed. Masoud Pezeshkian, he called for utmost restraint in handling demonstrations against the rising cost of winning. Any violent or coercive behavior should be avoided. Dialogue, engagement, and listening to the people's demands. Like, wow. I mean, that is...
Yeah, and that is not what the Supreme Leader is saying.
87, man, you know? That reminds me short.
It also reminds me a little. One of my first great moments at Stratfor was it was early Arab Spring, and everybody thought Hosni Mubarak was gonna go out to pasture, and I was sitting there like, there is no way Hosni Mubarak is gonna go out of his own volition. And we were all huddled around the TVs because all the analysts thought I was an intern at this point, and they all thought that he's gonna announce his resignation. I was like, there's no way he's announcing his resignation. And he went on TV and was like, I am the president of Egypt forever. I will do everything. And I was like, guys, I told you, like, he's not. And then of course Obama, helped shuttle him out a couple of days later. But anyway, reliving my glory days. Okay, I said 12 minutes. We did 15 minutes. Let's put a pin in it. I'm sure we'll be back with emergency thoughts if anything else happens in Iran. And I'm going to try to write up some thoughts over the weekend. Unless, do you have anything else you want to say on Iran?
No, I think we handled it well. We both think that this time is different. Like, this is, and I think that there is absolutely no way that Trump will not receive credit for this. Like, obviously he will be denied that credit, but objective analysts should give the White House credit. And I really want to emphasize that because I'm about to...
You're about to tear... I know what you're doing. You're setting it up.
I'm about to blow here.
Okay, so... Marco, I'm not even going to say you.
No, you
we
should
know
set
that
it up.
the president.
Set it up. Set it. This is what you do.
Set it up. Okay.
This is what you do. Set it up.
I know. I send up the lob, and then you're Clint Capella. You're going to throw it down.
Capella, older than Khamenei. Like, can I at least be like Jackson Hayes? Jesus Christ.
You'd rather be Clint Capella than Jackson Hayes.
I would definitely want to be Clint Capella over Jackson Hayes, the resident golden retriever of the NBA. But yes, go ahead. Shots fired.
Okay.
Jackson, if you're listening to this, please, for God's sake, get more coordinated.
If you're listening to this, please share with your fellow NBA players. I want KD and Steph and everybody else listening to the Cousins. They need to be doing that. Or maybe, I don't know, but we can have that conversation later. Okay, so let's set it up a little bit. The president has been talking about Greenland for months, for years, about taking it. But shortly after Maduro was exfilled, things got a little bit more serious. On Monday, so we're recording Friday, January 9th. I believe we will push this out today, if not early tomorrow morning. But he said, we need Greenland from the standpoint of national security. Let's talk about Greenland in 20 days. That's a quote from the president. Stephen Miller went on CNN with Jake Tapper. And I mean, he said a bunch of things, but he also insisted that it was the formal position of the U.S. government that Greenland should be part of the U.S. and that the iron laws of nature would show that U.S. force could achieve that. White House press secretary was out saying the same thing. Folks are on Polymarket making bets that the U.S. will acquire Greenland in the next year. Marco Rubio is the only one to try and lower the temperature a little bit, and just a little bit, because he's saying, no. The president doesn't want to invade Greenland. He just wants to buy it, and he's threatening to invade it so he can get a better price. I think the subtext of that is, please, guys, Cuba, I'm so close. Please don't tell me that I'm going to lose Cuba because you guys are going on this foolhardy errand in Greenland. So that's sort of this. And then the last thing with the setup is that Denmark, which is the current controller of Greenland is part of the Danish realm, is taking the rhetoric seriously. I think, as we mentioned on the last episode, Denmark's Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen, who I have a much higher opinion of than Marco does, said that if the United States chooses to attack another NATO country, everything will stop. You also had a pretty stark statement from France, Germany, Italy, Poland, Spain, the UK, and Denmark, saying that Greenland belongs only to its people. Last but not least, I don't know if you saw this, but there was a report from Reuters just an hour or two ago that I just tweeted at you, Marco, that said the Trump administration is thinking about payments to individual Greenlanders to sweeten the pot for them, to which I say, this is the fourth dimensional chess that you weren't ready for. Maybe you're right that there's no fiscal stimulus in the United States, but did you conceptualize fiscal stimulus for other places in the world coming from the White House? No, I don't think you had.
Diabolically brilliant, yes.
Anyway, so go for it.
Oh my God, I don't know where to start, honestly. So first of all, my problem is not necessarily with the Trump negotiating tactics, which we should by now be very familiar with. President Trump once famously said, when he was asked, why did he hire John Bolton? I forgot the exact quote, but almost verbatim, was something like, the reason I hired that idiot, and those are President Trump's words, not mine, is because when I have Bolton next to me in negotiations, the counterparts think I'm going to invade them. This is why Liberation Day last year had Peter Navarro and Howard Lutnick starring. Peter Navarro went on a media blitz, effectively telling the world that America was going to become a neo-McKinleyist den of tariff-financed America firstness, which is like just astonishingly stupid. But people listened to this and they were like, oh my God. And then, of course, adults came and negotiated something else. And instead of some neo-McKinleyist revival, where Howard Lutnick's vision of Americans bottling Fiji water in, Wisconsin, instead of that, we got... And growing bananas, yes, thank you. Tilling for coffee and bananas. What did we get? We got effectively a consumption tax that no Republican in history of Republican Party would have ever approved. We effectively have a consumption tax in the United States of America. It raises quite a bit of money. It's calmed down the bond market. It's actually not bad policy when you kind of think about it. It would have been better if it was like on all goods, not just foreign, but whatever. I'll put away my elite globalism aside. The point is that instead of some neo-McKinleyist revival going back to 19th century, we got just what everybody else has, including socialist Denmark, a nice VAT. So we got to be very careful not to over-index to what President Trump says. So I will do that, though. I will go after that. But first and foremost, my vitriol today is dedicated to all the children who have wandered into an adult conversation online. If I see another person tweeting at me about how Greenland is strategically important to America, I will light myself on fire. Okay. Yes, we're very much aware. I know what the GUK gap is. Okay. I knew that before you knew what geopolitics is. Greenland is extremely, extremely relevant to American national security. And if you want to see the latest rundown of this broken down into sections, neatly digested for you, then read Jacob's Substack piece on Greenland, where you break down all the ways that Greenland is truly strategic. So no, this isn't about actually rare earths, which are not rare, for God's sakes. It's not about oil deposits. It's the fact that the Arctic is like the Mediterranean. I loved what you wrote about that, Jacob. It's got very few choke points. Greenland basically controls pretty much all of them. And on top of that, it sits, of course, on top of America. So if you're going to launch ICBMs, we all know this. But here's the thing that people online and just general people who have wandered into this conversation like children, what they don't understand is that there's absolutely nothing right now, currently in January 9th, 2026, that prohibits America from acting on these concerns. The United States of America effectively shares sovereignty with Denmark over Greenland. Max Weber famously said, the definition of sovereignty is the monopoly over the legitimate use of force within a given territory. That is how we define sovereignty. Yes, if you commit a petty crime or even a felony in Greenland, it will be Danish authorities that will deal with that, or local Greenland authorities. But the United States of America has a base. The United States of America at one point was drilling the ice core sheets to see if they could launch nuclear missiles without telling Denmark that they were doing that. The United States of America had 10,000 troops in Thule Air Base. Now, the Thule Air Base has subsequently been renamed. It's now a space base. It has only 150 individuals, but that is due to no actions from Copenhagen or Nuuk. That is purely the result of American decisions, i.e., Cold War ended, so the United States of America said, we don't need 10,000 people north of the Arctic Circle. Let's downsize. So if America were now to say, hey, let's upsize, there is nobody who can prohibit that from happening. So that's why I don't want to spend another word of this discussion on why Greenland is critical. That is not in contention and never has been. When Denmark was run over by Nazis in 1940, the United States of America invaded Greenland and took it. And no, Denmark did not authorize that. The Danish ambassador to Washington, D.C. said, hey, why don't I sign an agreement with you so you can do this? He was sentenced to death by the regime in Denmark. Now, you might say, well, yeah, but it was Nazis running Denmark, so, he was the authority. No, he wasn't. If Nazis ran over the United States of America, Denmark would not have been able to invade Alaska, okay? There is a clear power disparity here that clearly does mean that the United States of America effectively has some sovereignty already over Greenland. It can do whatever it wants. It can go walk in and out of that place as it wishes, and it has throughout modern history. So if you're a Trump fan, if you're a MAGA acolyte, let me say this very simply so you can understand it. Donald Trump did not discover the relevance of Greenland. The United States of America has known about it for basically a century and has been actively acting upon it. If tomorrow the United States of America wanted to put 10,000 troops in its airbase, it could do that and nobody would stop them. Okay, so I'm going to stop here. I want to steer our conversation towards like where this is going rather than the significance of Greenland, because again, read Jacob's report on Substack. He nails it. This is not news. And if anybody on Twitter tells me again why Greenland is important, I will light myself on fire.
Yeah, the only thing I want to add to that is in 1949, after World War II, the Danes basically said, okay, we'd like Greenland back, please. And the United States said, no, actually, you're going to sign a document in 1951 that legitimizes that we can do whatever we want. And the United States has done whatever it wanted. One thing I did not put in the piece that's a good friend, I won't name his name, but who is a Dane himself and had relatives who were in Greenland, like teachers or something like that. You mentioned project, was it sand ice or ice worm? I forget what it was, where they were trying to hide the nuclear weapons in the Greenland ice sheet. Great idea, by the way, whoever came up with that one. They failed. They tried for 7 years and they couldn't make it work.
They learned that ice moves.
But one of the reasons Greenland has outlawed oil and gas exploration and uranium mining and a bunch of other things, which is one of the reasons why the resources is not the story here, because you can't just go to Greenland and get a bunch of resources because there's no development, is because there was a nuclear accident at the air base, and the United States didn't tell the native Greenlanders who were cleaning it up what went on. And so everybody who was involved in that got cancer and everything else and had huge health issues. So when you are wondering, well, why Greenland seems to want independence, but why do 85% of them not want to be part of the United States? Because they've had a negative experience with the United States, and it's going to take a lot more than a Trump payment in order to get them to come around. Anyway, I just wanted to throw that little nugget in there. But take us away to what happens next.
So first of all, before we go there, I want to dispel another thing. So first point is like, oh my God, Greenland is important. Yes, everyone's aware of it. America's been acting on it and has satiated those national security interests. The second one is, but the Monroe Doctrine. So if I can just cook on this for a little bit because it's so beautiful. The Monroe Doctrine, Greenland is it sticks out like a sore thumb. It's not within American domain or whatever. Well, first of all, it's controlled by Denmark, a NATO member state. But forget that. Spain is a NATO member state. There's a continuum of American allies. And I would argue that Denmark might be, aside from Australia, the most committed American ally in history. It has always been extremely committed to this military alliance, to the point where the Danes sent troops to Iraq. Forget Afghanistan. Everybody went to Afghanistan. America gets attacked by Al-Qaeda. There was a real solidarity behind the invasion of Afghanistan. But invasion of Iraq, for those of you who don't remember or lived on the moon, split the West. France famously, said no. Freedom fries. We didn't call them French fries for a while. Denmark, a country that I'm sure most Trump supporters believe is some sort of a socialist, Scandinavian, Nordic haven. Well, actually, no, they sent troops to Iraq. And, 20 odd Danes died fighting with Americans in that conflict. So this is important. The first and foremost, yes, Greenland is not under the American flag, but this is a very close American ally. Second thing is there's many parts of the Western Hemisphere that are not controlled by the United States. So the Monroe Doctrine, this obsession with it, I mean, why not invade French Guiana? Here's France, who you would argue, if a European continental power ever swerves from an American alliance, I would put my money on France.
Mm-hmm.
And here it is launching ballistic missiles from French Guiana, has military installations in South America. You've got Saint-Pierre and Miquelon, a French possession that controls shipping through the St. Lawrence River. Why isn't the Trump administration defending our American interests by invading these French possessions, as an example? So that's the second problem I have. When people say it's critical, and then you say, yeah, but America's always controlling. Yeah, but now we're reasserting Monroe Doctrine. Well, like, why not invade everyone else? So let's go into where I think this is headed. I think this is headed towards a world where, the United States, I think Greenland will become independent. I think this is clearly going to accelerate that process. And that will solve this problem. Why? Because Greenland is what political scientists would call a microstate. A microstate is not about size. It's about size and population. Now, in Greenland's case, it's huge, but it has 57,000 people. This is only slightly more than San Marino, Andorra, Liechtenstein. Is Liechtenstein a sovereign, independent nation? Is San Marino a sovereign, independent nation? Yes. According to some legalistic definition, they have a vote at the UN General Assembly. If you commit a crime in San Marino...
According to Max Weber, do you think they have the monopoly of violence?
So that's an interesting question, because on one hand, yes, if you, for example, commit domestic abuse in San Marino, it won't be Italian police that comes to you. So yes. However, does San Marino have the capability to sign a strategic partnership agreement with China? And the answer is no, it does not. Liechtenstein does not have that ability either. Monaco actually has a deal signed in 1918 where France conducts its defense and some of its foreign policy. So microstates don't get to decide, okay? If Greenland becomes independent, its foreign policy and defense will never be in the hand of 57,000 Greenlanders. That will just never, ever happen. The Western world, Western civilization is not going to allow 57,000 people living north of the Arctic Circle to decide the fate of the West. And any liberal listening to this, or like Dane or Greenlander, no offense, guys, but that will never, ever, ever happen. Like, there won't be some government in Nuuk that says, you know what we should do? We should do X. No. If it has to do with foreign policy and defense, it will always be subject to somebody else's approval. And that's just the way the world works. Again, Andorra, San Marino, Monaco, Liechtenstein cannot sign a strategic partnership with Russia or China. Italy will turn off your water if you're in San Marino, for God's sake. So that's why I think that where this is headed is towards a Monaco-style arrangement, where Monaco is independent, it's cool, it's got some gambling, it's got nice beaches, but the reality is that foreign policy and defense of Monaco have nothing to do with the Garibaldi family that runs the town. Similarly, the people of Greenland will not decide who mines their mines and who protects their waters, and they will not have sovereignty in that sense. So no, sovereignty is not a binary idea. It's not a 1 or a 0. Just because you have a seat at the UN General Assembly doesn't actually mean that you are fully sovereign. Many states have layers of sovereignty applied to them, and that's why I think that that's where this is headed. And what Denmark should do, and this is where Danes seem to be a little bit frozen in space and time, and there doesn't, even the European officials that were quoted in the media said, like, we haven't had any requests from Danes. Like, there hasn't been that much coordination. If I was running Denmark, I would just say, you know what, let's rush this referendum, and then let's post-referendum decide some sort of a joint foreign and defense policy coordination with Americans over Greenland.
Yeah. You talked about Denmark being one of the foremost allies of the United States. Let me also just shout out Denmark. If you don't know the story of the rescue of the Danish Jews, Denmark is really the only country in Europe that saved its Jews from the Nazis. So have always had a soft spot in my heart for Denmark. They're good people there. Bulgaria tried, by the way. They just didn't have a Sweden that they could send their Jews to. So some high marks to Bulgaria too. But that's your list of countries that tried to save their Jews. So
by the way,
they also get that.
Great movie, Flame and Citron, starring Mads Mikkelsen, for whom I have a giant mad crush. He's awesome. So Flame and Citron is a good movie to watch. It's a Danish movie about basically the underground, sort of anti-Nazi movement in Denmark. So look, let's now get into like why this is stupid. It's stupid because Denmark is a close ally. I mean, that's what it comes down to. I mean, it really comes down to, and it's not me saying it. There's a plethora of commentary from Republican senators who have actually started to push really hard on this. So first and foremost, we had the Senate Armed Services Committee Chair, Roger Wicker, Republican from, I believe, Mississippi. He said, this is a topic that should be dropped. Senator Dan Sullivan of Alaska said, we have a treaty with them, Denmark. We have troops there. The treaty allows for the expansion of troops if we request it and they approve it. They're an important national security ally. And then one of my favorite ones, Susan Collins called the whole situation very unfortunate. I wish that the administration would stop talking about taking control of Greenland. It makes no sense whatsoever. Denmark is a member of NATO, and that only makes it more offensive to that country and to Greenland. Jerry Moran, Republican from Kansas. There should be no invasion of Greenland. Denmark is an ally. And then I think finally, one of my favorite ones, if I can just find it. Yes, Tom Tillis from North Carolina, Republican, basically said, and I quote, "You know what makes me cranky? Stupid. What makes me cranky is when people don't do their homework." That's not what we do here on this podcast, Cousin Jacob. It's mainly Jacob who does the homework, but when he sets this stuff up, he sets it up with facts. Go to his Substack. Everybody knows how critical Greenland is. What apparently a lot of people don't understand is how the United States can pretty much do willy-nilly whatever it wants in order to ensure that the importance of Greenland satiates American national security interests. But golf clap to these Republican senators who do understand that. And now I'm going to play one of my favorite Republican senators, Senator Kennedy. Your senator, I believe, Jacob. Senator Kennedy.
Yes, he is a senator from the great state of Louisiana.
He uses his southern drawl the way that D'Artagnan uses his rapier. All right? I mean, if you have... just go on YouTube and spend like an hour. Like, you may not agree with anything that he's saying, but the way he says it is just, it's so gentlemanly. It's so just Southern charm and yet so cutting. So we're going to now splice in his comment. He's speaking about the Trump administration and its policy towards Greenland. So
to invade Greenland and attack its sovereignty, a fellow NATO country, would be weapons-grade stupid. President Trump is not weapons-grade stupid.
All right, so look, the point is, this is not disputable. There's no dispute here. Invading Greenland, annexing it without Denmark's, blessing, would be stupid. And it would be stupid because the intention is to secure American interests. They're already secured, but it would create a new source of weakness, which is a potentially irreparable breakdown in NATO alliance. And that is a cost that's just way too high.
You know I love playing devil's advocate, Marco, but not even I can play devil's advocate to that point. But I do want to ask you then why is the Trump administration doing this? It's not just Stephen Miller. Like, this is coming from Trump himself, and it's nonstop from Trump himself, and he's not stupid. So why do you think he keeps pushing on this?
Well, like Senator Kennedy said, this is weapons-grade stupid, but he does not believe that Trump is stupid. I agree with Senator Kennedy. As I've said before many times, and as we started this podcast with tariffs on April 2nd, President Trump often leads with the Peter Navarro, the Howard Lutnick, the Stephen Miller, and then gets something else. Now, in this particular case, though, I agree with you. Something is curious. Because what else are you going to get?
Yeah. What do you want? Like, do you want to pay hundreds of billions of dollars for something that you already have? Like, what? You have it already.
And so that's where I do worry that the underlying reality here is that President Trump, in many ways, sees himself. There's a lot of this analysis from China experts saying that Xi Jinping will not be satiated until he has expanded the territory that Beijing controls. Every great Chinese leader did that, as is often pointed out. And President Trump often does see the world in very 19th century terms. In many ways, I salute this because I do think the world is more like the 19th century. So you do have to kind of pump the brakes on some normative moral concerns that you just don't have the ability to pursue. On the other hand, this would be very much a 19th century move to literally grab a piece of territory just so you can say your borders have expanded. Which in this case, the United States, I mean, that is, in some ways, it makes sense. Sure, why not? It's just an island that nobody lives. Why not expand it? But the reason why not is that NATO gives the United States of America power projection deep on the Eurasian Peninsula. It ensures that Europeans remain committed to American interests. Yeah, maybe not when you invade Iraq, but, 8 out of 10 things the Europeans pretty much go along with. Why would you want that to drop to 2 out of 10? Like, why?
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. And I just want to underscore here, maybe somebody might be listening to this and be like, well, what about the resources? He's a realist, he's a businessman. Maybe he thinks he can get the resources out. 97% of Greenland's export revenue comes from fish, not from zinc and graphite and oil and all these other things.
But somebody would then say, but that's because American ingenuity and exceptionalism has not been applied to this territory, to which I will answer 30 meters of ice sheet.
Yeah, I mean, it has been. We've had it since 1951 officially, and well before that, and we haven't done anything particularly strong with it. I think, though, this also shows the flip side of this. The Europeans still don't understand the way to deal with Donald Trump. They are clutching at their pearls because President Trump is fixated on Greenland. And I will say the thing that I don't think you will allow yourself to say, which is Trump is sometimes just stupid. This is stupid, and he's got something on his mind, and he's just going to continue pushing it. But if you're Europe, I know it offends your modern sensibilities. You want to pretend like you aren't the continent that invented imperialism and colonialism and all these other sorts of things.
Why Denmark in Greenland to begin with?
Yeah, let's think about it a little bit. But if President Trump says
makeup of Greenland's population, yes, true.
Well, actually, the Inuits probably came from Canada. It looks. I actually went into this. I didn't put this in the piece, but there was a Norse population there, and they left. They went back to Denmark because they didn't want to be in Greenland. Probably that's probably the answer. Green. But if you're Europe or if you're Denmark here, you don't need to clutch your pearls and be like, this is the end of everything. This is the end of NATO. How dare you run roughshod over the self-determination of the Greenland people? Just say, okay, how much?
Well, okay.
What do we get?
So let's break that down.
That's the response, and you'll get whatever you want.
Look. I sympathize with your point, right? I sympathize it. This is where I have to say, I know I'm a nihilist realist on this show, but I do have to agree with the constructivist brethren in the political science community. Tone matters. It just does. It just does. President Trump is not wrong. Why not? First of all, there was a proposed sale of Greenland to the United States of America. I believe that U.S. Congress said no to the West Indies.
Originally, yes.
Originally in the 19th century. I believe that Greenland was being discussed in that sale. The Danes were shall we throw in Greenland? And Congress said, nah, we don't want to do it. So look, you're right. There is, why clutch the pearls? Well, the pearl clutching is because of the tone. I think that's where the tone does matter. The United States of America is just going to seize something that belongs to another country. And so that's where, and that's where President Trump has kind of poisoned the potential negotiations. Why not approach Denmark through backdoor channels? Like, Denmark has its own domestic political sensitivities. Why do that to an ally? And this is where a lot of Americans listening to this, I think they just don't understand how close Denmark has been with the US. Why does that matter? At the end of the day, who cares? Like, Denmark makes Legos. Like, whatever. We'll do without Legos. The reason it matters is because if you're a country...
Well, I just want to say, they don't just make Legos. They're also the reason that increasing numbers of Americans are not fat. Like, remember that this is also like a biotech hub and everything else.
Yes, thank you, Denmark, for that. So look, 6 million Danes, right? America's going to insult 6 million Danes. Somebody listening to this in this new world, we don't care about that. All right, cool story, bro. But then you signal to every other American ally that going out of your way to be an ally is just not smart. Like, this is why reputation matters in game theory. This is a mathematical concept for all of you listening to this. Repeated games do matter. And Denmark, again, I know it's a NATO member state, so people have this like instinct to put them in the same category as Bulgaria or Germany or Norway or France. It's not. It is one country in the NATO alliance that almost always does what America says. Almost always. And why? Why do you think? Because it's a peninsula at the end of Germany. It's flat. And has no way to defend itself against anyone ever. Okay, so it learned from its history, once you get over the Vikings and the fact that it was a global power, once that ended, it's basically completely and utterly indefensible. And it has a culture and a history of being an ardent American ally. They sent troops to Iraq. I cannot, like you and I both, and most MAGA supporters, all agree that Iraq was an incredibly stupid thing to do. And I'm sure the Danes knew it was stupid, and yet they still sent their soldiers there, and they died with Americans. And America says, like, nah, cool story, bro, but we're going to take this. And so from a game theoretical perspective, that is an incredible own goal because it signals to all other American allies that maybe you should, not be that thorough of an ally. Maybe you do a deal with China on occasion because the Americans at the first opportunity are going to say, like, oh, cool, you lost 30 soldiers in Iraq. Yeah, we don't give a shit.
Well, does that mean you think that the United States will not do this? Or are you worried that the United States is actually going to do this?
So this is where I agree with Senator Kennedy. I disagree with you. I think President Trump has stupid ideas, but he is not stupid. So what does that mean? I think he just floats stuff. I'm sure there was a cabinet meeting at the White House. What should we do with these tariffs? And someone was like, we should finance the entire government through tariffs, which is impossible mathematically. It's literally stupid. And he literally went with that idea. And then the bond market, American allies, American public, master race of penguins of Heard Island, everybody revolted against this. Lesotho was like, you will not get Levi jeans anymore. And then he went with the other option, which is okay, fine, we'll have a consumption tax and we'll call it a tariff. So that's where I think that, yes, I agree with you. Some ideas are stupid, but then they're just floated. And then when there's a cacophony of resistance, particularly from his own, fellow Republicans in the Senate, and some of these people are not, it's not just Murkowski. It's not it's like Collins and, it's not just the kind of senators you would think are opposed to this. It's also his ardent supporters that are basically saying this is not going to happen. I think what's going to end up happening is, we're going to engage into some negotiations. And I think the easiest way for Denmark, and this is where Denmark needs to show some agency, for God's sakes. They just can't just be like you said, they can't just be like, oh my God, this is terrible. Yes. So do something about it. And I think the way to do that is simply to allow the Greenlanders to have independence, and then the United States of America to have an overt treaty with Greenland and independent Greenland that says, look, we're in charge of your foreign and defense policy.
Do you think that there's been any permanent and lasting damage done to the NATO alliance as a result? Well, I should say, like, let's say for the sake of argument, that's what happens, that Trump pulls it back. Like, this all gets, it goes to the dustbin of the crazy things that Trump has said and then has passed. Do you think this does any meaningful permanent damage to the NATO alliance?
Yep, for sure. I mean, what I just said, politics and geopolitics in game theoretical terms is a repeated game. If it was just a one-off game, you could do whatever you wanted. You can nuke Copenhagen and then just, take their GLP-1 formula, their Lego bricks in Denmark and Greenland, and that's done. But that's not what reality is. It's a repeated game. You cannot, it's like being in a marriage. You can't, like fidelity matters unless you have an open marriage, But like the reality is like, one mistake does matter. It changes the behavior of your adversaries. It changes the behavior of the people that you're playing this game with, which could be allies. And so, yes, I think that this is a wake-up moment for Europe. There have been many since February of 2022, but this is yet another one of those.
And are you convinced that Europe will wake up? I mean, I've been waiting. I mean, you said 2022. I mean, COVID was also a wake-up moment. Feels like we're still waiting, doesn't it?
I don't think so. I think that it's waking up. We can measurably and empirically show that Europeans are spending more money on defense. They're spending more money on infrastructure, and so on and so on. I think what they need to focus on is not the first order effects. It's like America has abandoned us. Russia is a threat. Let's build defense. Okay, cool. Sure. Whatever. Fine. But there's second order stuff that they need to do. And second order stuff is, let's finish the single market. Let's actually have a single market, because we don't. We only have a single market in goods. Where's a single market in services, in banking, telecommunications? Let's focus on a single market in energy, in electricity. There's a lot of things that Europe can be doing that's not about guns. It's more about the butter. But yes, I do think they've been woken up, and this is yet another way that they've been woken up. By the way, one other thing I want to mention is that there is a recent example of what I'm talking about. So I'm basically saying, look, Denmark should just transfer sovereignty to the people of Greenland. And then people of Greenland can get a deal with America that satisfies everyone. The United Kingdom actually recently did this. The Chagos Islands Agreement. The U.S. transferred its sovereignty over the Chagos Islands. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right. This is where Diego Garcia is the largest island of this chain. It actually transferred the sovereignty to Mauritius. So it's given up its control over the chain, but it retains a 99-year lease on Diego Garcia, which includes the U.S. military base. So it's not exactly what I'm talking about, but it's similar.
Yeah, and there's also plenty of U.S. precedent in terms of, the way that the United States, for example, has a relationship with Micronesia or some of these other, you can have it's like a compact of association or something like that. There are plenty of ways that the United States could engage even more with Greenland, although it goes back to the point that I don't really understand. The U.S. already has everything it needs from Greenland, and it doesn't have to pay for Greenland's social services or for its healthcare or provide stimulus to its people. That the Danish have to do that too. It's a really sick deal for the United States when you think about it. The U.S. gets to do whatever it wants. It doesn't have to actually manage anything, and that's it. It's literally perfect now. It's why it's so confusing that the Trump administration is so hyper focused on this.
Well, that's also you see people coming up with all sorts of hypotheticals. What if Russia invades and takes over Europe? What if Denmark elects an extreme Marxist left-wing party? And the answer is, yeah, we know what will happen. America will invade and annex Greenland. But that didn't happen.
Yeah. This already happened. The Nazis took over Europe and we took over Greenland.
There you go. Exactly. 1940. The point is, there's nothing, this is why this is one of those things that when you ask the question, well, why does Trump want it then? It may be that he has not been explained all the things that we're talking about. Maybe it hasn't been articulated to him. Clearly, the Republican senators are now doing the articulation, clearly, in very stark terms. Weapons grade stupid. The word stupid has been used by two different senators. I think that there is that latent risk, which is why I would not assign a 0% probability to a takeover of Greenland. I think there's that latent risk that this is one of those legacy things where President Trump just kind of wants this legacy. I think that's very low probability, and I don't think it's going to happen because I think President Trump, when faced with material constraints, when he does the risk assessment, ultimately chooses something that is not going to blow up the world. But, we'll see.
No. I also think he will not do it. Although I do think this entire exercise has been important for the children who wandered into the room to understand Greenland and a little bit more about U.S. geopolitics. Should we leave it there, Mark? Is there anything else you want to touch on? It's a relatively short episode for us, still longer than most.
It is.
Anything else you want to touch on?
Yes, I do want to touch on something else. Geopolitics is hot, and both of us are very, very, obviously fortunate that that's the case in many ways. I always joke, my hedge against apocalypse is that I kind of live off of the geopolitical vol. So there you go.
Yeah, I say it less diplomatically. I long ago came to terms with the fact that I profit off of death and destruction. So bring it on.
Look, it's hot. It's like it's an in thing. And all I would say is that, it's very dangerous as well, though. And what I mean by that is that I often find myself in rooms full of policymakers. Like last night here in Santa Monica, I was at a dinner where there were some very, very high level people who kind of craft certain policy. I don't want to say too much, but and you're sitting there and you're listening, and it's like, I know which Substack that guy got that view from. I know which blog that guy got that view from. And so it's not just some random uncle on X that's getting really bad information and then wandering into an adult conversation like a child. By the way, I'm repeatedly quoting Lebowski because I do feel like Goodman's character right now. About shut the fuck up,
That's really how I
Donnie.
feel most of the time. So I'm glad you know how it feels to be Jacob Shapiro.
But it's not just some random uncle. It's shocking to me, and I want everyone who's listening to this podcast who thinks that policy is crafted by really smart people who know everything Jacob and Marco know. And I'm not taking a swipe at the Trump administration at all. Oh my God. I would argue that Joe Biden administration was even more so run by people reading some sexy news Substacks. It is shocking to me how little primary research is done on some of this, to the point where, Senator Tillis said, what gets me cranky is when people don't do their homework. And I think that this Greenland example is being highlighted in the media because it's Trump and because there's a perception that the Trump administration doesn't do the homework. The truth is the American public doesn't do its homework. The education system is not set up for the American public to do its homework. What we value within the borders of America is not geopolitical homework. And I think that it's a unique thing to America in many ways, because in most other countries, your knowledge of the world does give you clout. You can pick up a girl, or sorry, not to be gendered, you can pick up a member of the opposite sex at a bar with your worldly knowledge. You ain't doing that in America. You're just not. You're just a nerd.
No, I often
that's a problem. And that's a problem because when something like this happens and you have both administration officials and just members of the public wandering into this like children into an adult conversation, again, to quote Goodman again, you just sit back and be like, have you not even done a cursory Wikipedia search?
Yeah, I often like to give this example. This was before the pandemic. Now I gave a talk at a geopolitics festival put on by an Italian geopolitical journal called Limes. First of all, can you even imagine a geopolitical festival in the United States? It's in this old castle building or whatever in Genoa, and the line was out the door. It was a free event, and people were lined up out the door just to listen from experts from around the world, Russia, Iran, myself, everything else, just talk about geopolitics. Like, you cannot imagine that happening in the United States. I think I've said this on the podcast before. One of the most amazing speeches, lectures I've ever seen. I'm sure it's still on YouTube. It was one of Tony Judd's last lectures before he got diagnosed with ALS. He got taken from us way too soon. What a genius and a titan of thought. But he talks about, I can almost quote him verbatim, that the future of the United States will not be in peril because of the will to power of a dictator, but because of the will to ignorance of society. And he was saying that in 2009 and talking about how the average American, it's not just that the education system has failed us, it's that the average American does not want to know things.
Well, that's what the risk is.
I just think that's true.
Listen, that's a bigger risk than America taking Greenland from Denmark. What's the biggest risk is that geopolitics is hot. It is popular. But it's being digested by most Americans, including those in power. And no, not just Trump administration. Biden administration was the same. It's being digested through pop culture. And look, we're guilty of it too, Jacob. We created Geopolitical Cousins, but we did it so that we can, be funny, have basketball references nobody wants, and discuss in depth and educate. Part of the reason I do this, and obviously you and I don't get paid for this. I mean, we both have day jobs that take all of our time. We have kids. Yours are even younger than mine and all sorts of other things in our lives. But the reason that I personally want to do this is this issue. When the President of the United States of America says, hey, let's seize a piece of territory we already effectively control from one of our closest allies, the median American should just laugh and say like, oh, it's just Trump being Trump. That will not happen because since 1949, we've had effective control over Greenland and we can do whatever we want because Tool Air Base once had 10,000 troops in it and we can do it again. Like, that should be common knowledge. And I think that is the biggest risk. Tony Judge completely correct. And what I would say is that is the biggest risk here, that I see that as geopolitics becomes more popular, the tools that the median American uses to gain knowledge of that newfound realm is through YouTube shorts and quirky videos and basically brain rot, to use the term my 12-year-old uses. Americans are using brain rot to analyze geopolitics. YouTube shorts and 30-second clips of cute, callous, glib takes on geopolitics instead of actually thinking about this with a historical context and understanding of how geopolitics actually works.
Well, and we'll have to get a hair in this because I have to pick up one of those aforementioned children here in a little bit. But I think this is actually methodologically one of the things that makes geopolitical analysis really hard, because it doesn't matter to a certain extent how right my Substack is on Greenland or how brilliant our analysis is, because the other part that we have to do is we have to get in the head of the leaders or the people actually making the decisions and look at it from their point of view. How do they understand it? And sometimes leaders will think very, very stupid things. Sometimes it will be Vladimir Putin, who's been locked in a library for a couple of years during COVID, reading books about 18th century Russian history and deciding, I can take Ukraine. I'm going to be the person who takes back Ukraine, and everything gets spoiled. You could be Douglas MacArthur on the Korean Peninsula and think, I'm going to push all the way to the border with China because these Chinese soldiers, they are weak. I don't think the Chinese are worth anything. They're not going to come at me. And then they're going to come at you like millions strong, and you're going to have a war, and millions of people are going to die just because you had some really antiquated and outdated racist notions and weren't up to date on your geopolitics. It's a double-edged sword. One of the things that is really hard about your and my job is precisely when the folks that are making the decisions are uninformed. It doesn't matter how good our analysis is, because you and I can't inhabit the place where it makes sense to even say that you want to take over Greenland.
And listen, it's not about correct forecasts or anything. I think one of the problems I have is that as geopolitics becomes more popular and as more people start to try to participate in that realm, they have, when you don't know something, you have a proclivity. I mean, I'm guilty of this too. You have a proclivity to want simple answers, silver bullets. So the frameworks and the methodologies that are becoming popular are those that are like, it's very Occam's razor type thinking. Like, what is a theory that requires the fewest number of assumptions? I'm going to pick that one to explain the whole world. And in my book, Geopolitical Alpha, there's many takeaways you can take from the book, But one of the takeaways is that, unfortunately, there is no palatable, easily digested, parsimonious, as my political science PhD professors would have used. There is no way to find a parsimonious theory for geopolitics. It is complicated, and you have to take it from very different directions. You have to have a holistic 360-degree approach to analyzing these issues. So when some idiot on X is like, rare earths, bro, it's like, number one, rare earths are not rare. Number two, even if we could get them from Greenland, we still have to ship them to China to refine. Number three, we can get them in Canada, bro. Number four, ice sheet. Number five, what?
Shut the fuck up, Donnie.
Right?
Well, and aside from Geopolitical Alpha, like we'll close on this. Like Philip Tetlock wrote a great book about which forecasters are accurate, and he divides forecasters into foxes and hedgehogs. And hedgehogs say the same thing over and over again, but it's good for the sound bites. So they're the ones that get taken on the interviews. And the fox will change his mind. I will change my mind on this podcast about 300 times before the end of the year.
By the way, Jacob, it's not just that you will change your mind on the forecast. Like any reasonably intelligent person should do that. It's more that you will sometimes say like, hey, look, domestic politics explains this issue, not natural resource access.
Yeah.
Or you will say, you know what, I thought this was about military strength. It actually comes down to be about, economics. And so it's not like that was Tetlock's real takeaway. It's that foxes use a multitude of perspectives and lenses, whereas a hedgehog is like geography. Boom. That's it. River valleys,
and
baby.
which is why this podcast is trying to thread the needle of, we want to be foxes, and yet we also want to be as entertaining as a hedgehog is. So like, we are going to give you like the bombastic take full of clarity. I'm going to predict the fall of Venezuela and Cuba, and I'm going to change my mind next week because that's the only way that people are going to consume it in a meaningful way. And if you're listening to this, yes, we do have day jobs, but I would love for there to be millions of listeners to this podcast. So it is your appointed task to spread this to every single human that you know so that we're not dealing with morons in the White House.
Well, I think like this podcast will be successful if people take from it both the irreverence with which we follow these topics. Because if you get too emotional with any of these issues, like you have lost your ability to be unbiased and analytical. Yeah. But the other one is if they actually do what you just said, which is like, there's multiple approaches to these questions. There is no simple answer. There's no simple theory. And quite often, I don't even know really what to say anymore. My brain just stopped. I've reached the limit. Quite often, the really boring explanation is the right one. I mean, that's kind of what I was going to say. But anyways, 99 times out of 100, I learned this from Roger Baker. 99 times out of 100, the boring explanation is the right explanation, but you still have to do the work to explain it. And the real analyst, the task of the analyst is to find the one time out of 100 that it's not the boring explanation, and you have to be able to explain it, to identify it, and communicate it. Like, that's the whole job right there. So anyway, all right. On that note, it's been a week. We'll get this out, and we will see. Let's see what next week has in store for us, cousin. Man, what a year.